It's like if you went to like a massage therapist and then at the end they were like, A of all, my turn, and B of all, we're dating now. And you're like, woo.
Yeah.
What?
Books, 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 books.
Hello and welcome to Didn't Read It, the podcast that wants to know what our smut knows. I am your host, Grace Todd, and with me this week is a new friend of the pod, Kathleen Lubey. Hi.
Hey.
How are you today?
Doing very, very well.
Thank you so much for joining us.
I'm really happy to. I'm happy to know what you didn't read.
So many things. There are so many things that I didn't read. And you are joining us for the first time. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Kathleen Lubey. I go by Kathy in most venues. I live in New York City. I'm an English professor at St. John's University, which is a wonderful university in Queens, New York, where I also live. And I teach 18th century literature there. I teach gender studies, sexuality studies. Sometimes I teach the history of pornography when I get a graduate class and can loop people into reading that smut. Yeah, and I direct the Writing Center at St. John's, which is pretty fun. Building a community of writers there, mostly among students, sometimes with other faculty. And I love teaching. I love reading racy literature of all eras, but especially of the 18th century, and I've managed to make a career of it. So that makes me pretty happy. And I most recently wrote a book about the history of pornography, written in English, coming out of the 18th century and being reprinted and pirated and generally messed with in the 19th and 20th centuries. And that book, for anyone who might want to know more about it, was published by Stanford University Press in 2022. And you can find it at their website or at my website, KathleenLubey.com, which is really just a little portal of the work I do and some public writing I've done and some academic writing I've done, mostly on matters of sexuality and the 18th century.
So your book, is called What Pornography Knows.
My book is called What Pornography Knows.
And that is how I found you, because I was reading it for some sort of background research when I was gearing up for our Valentine's Day special. We were talking about Anne Rice, and I was trying to find more like academic-y. I was like, I just need a very smart person to tell me some smart things about porn.
Happy to oblige.
And I found your book, and I was reading it, and I got like, I think I made it through the introduction and then emailed you. I was just like, I want this person to come talk to me on the podcast.
Amazing. Thank you for that. Yeah, it's a book that I hope the whole title is What Pornography Knows, Sex and Social Protest Since the 18th Century. And what I hope people either are surprised by or find interesting is that the pornographic literature I look at is indeed titillating in some ways, but it also contains all of this dissent and kind of arguing against how people, and especially women and gender minorities, are kind of operationalized in sex acts. Like there's this surprising sort of almost, I don't know, political consciousness embedded in how sex is described that largely we don't, I think about in pornography. We think it's kind of referential and straightforward and apolitical and maybe even oppressive. And yeah, I kind of wanted to write a history that resists the simplicity of that take. So anyone who wants to know more about that book can find it at Stanford University Press's website or my website, which is KathleenLubey.com, and has links to that book and my first book, which was called Excitable Imaginations and was about sexual writing and philosophy in the 18th century. And then I've done some crossover writing too for more public venues, not a ton, but that's linked there as well on my website.
Yeah, check out Kathy's book. It's good. I enjoyed it. And I happen to know because I had a couple glasses of wine at a bookstore in Charleston called Philosophers and Fools. And he, the lovely man who owns it, whose name I am forgetting, I'm so sorry, sir, said he was going to order at least one copy. So you can go if you are in Charleston.
Yes.
And you want a copy. of Kathy's book.
Yeah.
Go to Philosophers and Fools and be like, where is it?
That book. And please take a selfie of it and tag me on Instagram at Kathy Lubey.
We would love that.
Yes.
The first person to do that, we will send you some free Didn't Read It merch for being a good scholar, for being a scholar and a gentleman.
That would be remarkable. And to prove that a non-academic bookstore has my book on its shelf would be a true victory. So thank you for your service, listeners.
Alternately, go to your local bookstore and demand Kathy's book. Be like, why don't you have, what do you mean you don't have a copy of What Pornography Knows?
Dare you not have a copy of that book? Get it.
I like all of these plans. Send us proof of your misbehavior, dear listeners. We would love it. Well, Kathy,
yes,
you very generously have agreed to give me a bit of a research break. And you have come to tell me about something. What have you come to tell me about?
I've come to tell you about a piece of short fiction published in 1725 in London by the wonderful, the great Eliza Haywood, about whom I can say much. But right now I'll just say that the story that she wrote that we're going to talk about today is called Fantomina, or Love in a Maze. The title is longer, being a secret history of an amour between two persons of condition. Dun, dun, dun.
Oh my God. What a title. Two persons of condition?
Two persons of condition.
Of condition, you say?
And the scandal there, of course, is obviously men of condition were having lots of sex and pursuing love in a maze, but women rarely were. So
when we say of condition, what does that mean?
Of social rank, of notable social rank.
Oh.
Yes.
Of good condition.
It might refer to gentility, but it refers in this story to the aristocracy, to people who go to court and enjoy all of the formalities, fripperies, scandals, and luxuries of being associated with the court.
Okay. It's very funny that they didn't feel the need to say which condition. They're just like, condition, writ large.
Yeah. Not high blood pressure, not gout, not, things like that. Though condition sometimes referred to pregnancy, which, spoiler alert, will play a role.
Oh, this is one of those romance novels.
Mm-hmm. It is. The fun has to end at some point.
Okay. Now, so this is a lady pornographer.
She is a lady pornographer. So what is or is not pornography is debatable in this period. The category of pornography is an invention of the 19th century, around 1857 or so, or I don't know, the 1850s. So things written in the 18th century, one of the reasons they're interesting is there wasn't yet a word called pornography that booksellers put books on that were about sex. They were much more amorphous. They were part of the same category as any kind of like adventure fiction or picaresque fiction, which is like episodic kind of scandal fiction.
So there was just no warning if you were getting a bunch of tits and ass?
Nope. You just got it. That's the kind of risk one took when one purchased a novel. Also, that usually was published anonymously in the 18th century. Often authors' names were not on title pages, so you couldn't know, like, oh, that Eliza Haywood, she's a naughty one. So you might not know it's her fiction. You might or you might not. It's some, like, I'm looking at this title page does have her name, but some of the things she published did not have her name. So you wouldn't even necessarily know by author what you were getting.
But she's claiming this one. She is like, I am here.
Love in a maze. It's happening, kids. So it's an episodic, pornographic, some literary historians call it amatory fiction. So fiction, unlike domestic fiction, which we would affiliate with Jane Austen down the line or Samuel Richardson before her, that's fiction having to do with forms of desire and courtship that end in a respectable, virtuous marriage that is reproductive and, et cetera, normative. Haywood, throughout her career, was pretty interested in writing fiction that was amatory, so that had to do with desire that was not confined to those kinds of rules and conventions. As we'll hear, the home is not involved at all in the kinds of love that she pursues. She largely kind of has sex somewhat in public places.
Ooh.
inns or places that she roams around in public and finds. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So the novel is interesting from the beginning about her rank. As we were saying, she's a person of condition, and the title page tells us that. And the first line of the novel, and I'm calling it a novel even though it's short because Eliza Haywood called it a novel.
Sure.
We didn't really know what novels were till around Frances Burney or so.
We'll respect what she identified her novel as.
Exactly. We'll use her name for it. But it begins as follows. A young lady of distinguished birth, beauty, wit, and spirit happened to be in a box one night at the playhouse, where, though there were a great number of celebrated toasts, tarted up women, she perceived several gentlemen extremely pleased themselves with entertaining a woman who sat in a corner of the pit. Dun, dun, dun. So any woman sitting in a corner of the pit was probably a sex worker.
Oh.
Right, because the pit was notorious, for being a place where women of the night would sell their services, would provide company to men, and otherwise entertain, sort of unvirtuous kinds of come-ons.
The theater was a saucy place.
It was a saucy place. So she sits there up in her box, right? Because she's an aristocrat. We find out very early she's alone in town, which is a little bit implausible that she would be a person of high rank with no like brother or male cousin or father attending her to such public places. So she's sitting up by herself, unsupervised. A young lady means she's probably 16 or 17, sitting up in the box, looking down at the pit. And she gets very curious about what she's seeing. And Haywood writes, the longer she reflected on it, the greater was her wonder that some men, some of whom she knew were accounted to have wit, should have tastes so very depraved. She was young, a stranger to the world, and consequently to the dangers of it. Having nobody in town at that time to whom she was obliged to be accountable for her actions, did in everything as her inclinations or humors rendered most agreeable to her. So she's like, this excites my curiosity and wonder. There's nobody I have to answer to. Guess what I want to do?
I'm very attractive. I have money.
Yeah.
I have no one to stop me. And I'm very curious about these men doing saucy things.
Yeah. And what's so interesting about Haywood's emphasis here is not that this young woman knows what the sex workers are up to. She has no idea, right? It says she's from the country. She's new to town. She's a teenager. If she's an aristocrat, she's been presumably pretty well policed by her parents and her family. Probably even her reading has been overseen if we're, attributing any historical reality to her life. So she comes to town sort of wide-eyed. And what excites her curiosity isn't like, ooh, what does sex feel like? It's, wow, what do men say to women when those women aren't supervised, right? So she's just really interested, at the beginning anyway, in almost like sociability. Like, what will they say? Which is kind of, I don't know, not unbelievable that a young girl is just like, what's that guy gonna say to me if like, it's done in a place where like no one can kind of know, and I'm not accountable to my identity as this highborn person.
Yeah, I mean, that is very like, that is a thing that teenagers, I think, are very curious about now, is like, what do adults say to each other when they're unsupervised? What do these men know that they're not telling me?
Yeah. And the women, what do the women know that I don't know? And what might happen if I know? So the young woman, instead of watching the play, watches these interactions for the rest of the evening, goes home, and because she has all of these resources, she's like, guess what? I'm going to dress up like a sex worker and go to the play again. Yeah.
Whoa.
Amazingly.
That is not what I expected.
That's just the first of many surprises. She goes back to the playhouse the next night and dresses up like a woman of the night, but sits, I don't know why this is interesting to me, but it is, she doesn't sit in the pit where she saw the sort of common, in the 18th century, they would have been called streetwalkers, like women who solicited clients in public.
Yeah.
She sits in a gallery box, so like a little bit up, she uses her resource to like set her apart a little bit from that, but still dresses herself in a way that she can be seen as someone who would like entertain favors. So men immediately crowd around her. The image this gives of 18th century London is crazy. A crowd of purchasers of all degrees and capacities were in a moment gathered about her, each endeavoring to outbid the other and offering her a price for her embraces. Like she sits down and there's like an auctioneer. They're like, do I hear 20 pounds? 20 pounds. Do I have 25? They're like, it wouldn't have been that much money, but like they're, immediately just assigning value to her, and she's like accosted by these men.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is such a middle class teenage girl's fantasy of sex work, is like,
Yes.
I'm gonna dress up but as a fancy sex worker, and immediately I'm gonna be the most successful sex worker.
Well, totally. So here's where things get interesting. The last man who approaches her, whose name we learn, and I'll tell you it in a second, becomes her object of desire. And like semicolon, and she knows him because he's also a person of condition, i.e. an aristocrat who runs in the same tiny little circles of privilege that she does. So she knows him, but he doesn't recognize her because she's so kind of done up and so out of her rank in her dress that like it doesn't even compute to him that she's the same person.
We're going full Shakespeare. We're going like people put someone changes their shirt and it's just like you're a whole new person.
Totally. Yes, that's right. The magic pixie dust makes you, and later on we'll get to that. Like Haywood admits later on, that this is kind of amazing, that she's so good at dressing up that that like she fools him. So his name, we never actually find out the name of the young lady. We find out the names of her, we find out other names she takes, but we actually never find out her name. His name is Beauplaisir, like the word beau, like French, Beau, plaisir, Plaisir. So either like beautiful pleasure or like man of pleasure, right? Like a beau, like a boyfriendy pleasurable thing.
I'm immediately thinking of that there's that sex toy that everybody was really obsessed with, and it was called like the pleaser. It was called something really
Yeah, totally.
That's
totally
where my head's at.
Yeah, no, actually I think you have an idea for a product there that you should pursue. You could make it like Rococo, like a little 18th century luxury object vibrator.
Oh my God, I would buy that.
I think we would actually,
The Beauplaisir?
Taking notes.
All right.
So Beauplaisir pays his, I'm not going to say respects because it's not respectful. He pays his attention to her. She fixes on him as the object of her, I wouldn't say desire yet. I would say like her fascination or her desire as she feels it, which is like social desire. She's like giddy at receiving his attentions and hearing him talk to her so familiarly without any of the formalities of the way that they usually encounter one another. He wants to take her home that night. She pretends that she has a man who maintains her already, so that she's like the private mistress of someone and that she has to go home to him, but promises to see Beauplaisir the next night. And then in between, like part of Haywood's point is to, I think, and this is like my hot take on Haywood as a scholar, is that she writes fiction that is deeply titillating and deeply, as we're going to see, like sexy, but she's also building in this scaffolding of like, hey girls, watch it. like watch it. The boys are hot. You kind of want to do things with them. You also probably kind of want to do things with women. She's, I think, pretty queer friendly.
All right.
Right. But in this case, you're going to get like really excited by things that happen, and here's how they happen. Like, I think she's really detailing how a young, inexperienced woman would respond in this like overwhelming way to a flirtation and not quite know what she's doing. To wit, here is a quotation. She goes home that night and she's thinking about seeing Beauplaisir the next night. All the charms of Beauplaisir came fresh into her mind. She languished. She almost died for another opportunity of conversing with him. And not all the admonitions of her discretion were effectual to oblige her to deny laying hold of that which offered itself the next night. Right? So her discretion is trying to tell her, hey,
calm down.
Yes. And it just doesn't work because she's like languishing and dying and so excited and expecting, in fact, that like she'll be able to manipulate, she'll be able to take him really far down the road of flirtation, but stop him. Like she thinks she's going to be able to do that.
Sure.
Yeah.
So it's I am a teenage girl experiencing life outside of etiquette for the very first time, but I am also different than all of the other girls, and I'm not going to lose my virtue by
Right.
accident
That's right.
because I'm in charge of this situation and nothing could possibly go wrong.
Because I'm in charge of that situation, and also because my virtue is enshrined by my family name and my noble birth. Right? Like there's such a powerful, again, we can think of Jane Austen as a case in point. If you think of like the, Lady Catherine de Bourghs of Jane Austen, there are, that entrenched sense that a person's birth shields them from certain kinds of conflict or certain kinds of imposition is very real and very compelling. So she probably thinks herself kind of like protected by her rank, like that it could never ever get out of her control.
Right. So it's not clicking for her that by like dressing up as a sex worker, she's exempted herself from her own privilege.
Totally.
In the way that so many a slumming upper middle class child has done, and maybe doesn't grasp the reality of the potential consequences now that this has happened.
Yeah.
And what you're saying is that like Haywood is doing this, the contemporary reader would have wrapped their head around that pretty immediately.
Oh, absolutely. They're like, they're hearing in what I just read, they're hearing the like, oh no, oh girl, no.
Oh, baby girl.
Yeah, no. It's like taking, a drink from a stranger. Like she's doing something that is like, it's the text waving its arms and like telling her she's making a decision she's not going to be able to recall.
Okay.
And it's kind of funny, but it's also kind of scary. And I think Haywood taps into that. I don't think she's just making fun of this girl. I think that Haywood is really sympathetic to how quickly a woman's fortunes can turn by one decision that she can't recall or can't reverse.
Well, and that's where the narrative tension is coming from too for the reader, is you're just like, oh boy.
Yeah, what's going to happen? So what does happen? So let's see how this plan pans out for her.
I'm so excited.
Yeah, exactly. It's amazing. So the next night she sees Beauplaisir again. And at this point, it might be worth noting, she's maintaining 2 rooms. Like, 'cause she has so much money. She's living, it turns out, we find out, at her aunt's house, which of course is I'm sure like some sort of palace, not a palace, but an extraordinarily luxurious home in London. And she's now maintaining a room where she can take Beauplaisir because she has to pretend that she's a sex worker who has lodgings she can take him to, because she's not the kind of sex worker who would like be at a brothel or who wouldn't have a home at all, right? So she's still playing with that rank thing.
Sure, and that would also be much harder to fake. Just like, hi, can I hang out in your brothel?
Yeah. Like,
no
I
reason.
I haven't been here before, but is there a free room I can just like grab?
But like not use.
Yeah, exactly. But not go all the way in. Totally. So they have supper to end their date night, as it were, where I think they've gone to the play again and they've flirted a lot. And he starts to take freedoms with her, right? He starts to make physical advances. She tries to slow him down. And I'm going to read a pretty long passage, which is very much in Haywood's style. She'll connect sentences with dashes instead of periods, or, she kind of wants to sweep you along through the description in ways that I think replicate the sweeping along that's happening in the action she's describing. So this is Haywood. It was in vain that the heroine tries to slow down Beauplaisir. She would have retracted the encouragement she had given. In vain she endeavored to delay till the next meeting the fulfillment of his wishes. She had now gone too far to retreat. He was bold, he was resolute. She, tearful, confused, altogether unprepared to resist in such encounters, and rendered more so by the extreme liking she had to him.
Ooh.
I know, she really didn't like him. Shocked, however, at the apprehension of really losing her honor, she struggled all she could, and was just going to reveal the whole secret of her name and quality when the thoughts of the liberty he had taken with her, and those he still continued to prosecute, prevented her, with representing the danger of being exposed, and the whole affair made a theme for public ridicule. So I'll stop there for a sec. So like,
whoa.
Totally. Yeah, what do you think of that? I'm really, really curious how that makes you feel toward her or toward that moment. Like, what do you think is happening?
The sort of like first layer is I'm kind of trying to parse the language to figure out what exactly has gone down. So, because like they have not had penetrative sex,
Right.
because she's still worried about losing her virtue, capital V virtue. But enough has occurred that she's already been caught in the trap that we, the reader, intuited probably immediately, which is like, you thought your reputation was going to protect you, except now you've sullied your reputation, and now you're afraid to use your reputation to protect you because it's sullied. Oops.
Yep. Exactly. It's like in that moment that she's like, wait, I haven't had sex with him yet. So if I tell him who I am, he'll stop. Oh, but wait, maybe it doesn't even matter that I haven't had sex with him, because if I expose who I am, this whole thing is going to become a public scandal. And
it's almost like all of this etiquette existed for a reason, to protect me from this exact situation.
Totally. Because men will, I mean, if I may, trigger warning, because men will rape me given the opportunity.
Right.
If
And
I'm
that's
with them.
And we're now suddenly realizing that we are in a pickle.
Yes.
But also in like very classic romance novel fashion. And
Yes.
I want to be very clear. I'm not saying I endorse this. I'm also not necessarily saying I'm definitely not saying I endorse it. But it is a trope in romance novels even now of like, oh no, oh yes.
Yeah.
Like I don't want this, and the consequences will be terrible, but also I'm very horny right now, and
Yes.
I am actually enjoying myself. But my reputation, but my clitoris. What
Yes.
do I do?
Yeah, totally. Totally. And like, we're inclined to think that romance fiction and amatory fiction, which many literary historians long before me have made a connection right across the centuries between those genres, we tend to think of them as non-realist, right? We think of them as fantasy. The bodice ripper, which is like actually a term that kind of annoys me because I feel like it's like deeply simplifying, even though it also is true. But like, what are we saying isn't real about romance or amatory fiction? Like, okay, an aristocrat dressing up and the guy not recognizing her, like all pretty far-flung, but like a young woman feeling super turned on and thinking a guy is really hot and really wanting to have sex with him, but like being conflicted about the moral or religious or like social codes that tell her she can't. Pretty sure that's realistic. I'm pretty sure that's not like totally, that's not, the stuff of medieval, chivalric romance. That's like the stuff of living as a girl and maybe boys to some extent under like surveillance.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, I remember being a horny teenager trying to navigate in real time, like what I thought I wanted, what I know I want, what I'm suddenly starting to want because I'm like, we all know that being horny makes you dumb.
Yes, totally.
And it makes things seem like a good idea that didn't seem like a good idea 10 minutes ago.
Yes.
And then when you add a bunch of baggage, like I know a lot of people who were raised like super religious, and so they have a lot of hangups. And like, thankfully, I wasn't raised super religious, but I was also raised in America, so I had my own hangups. And like,
totally.
It's a lot to juggle, and it's not even the 1700s anymore.
Exactly. Yeah, that's I entirely agree, and I entirely have my own narratives that I can draw on. Mine have more to do. I wonder if my mom's going to listen to this, but mine have more to do. Hope not. I was raised Catholic, but I'll just dance across the surface and say I expected as a horny teenager to feel bad, to feel consequences about things I did that I never felt bad about. I felt totally unconflicted and like waited all the time to be like, oh, like, is one day God going to speak to me and tell me that I did a thing I wasn't supposed to do? And that just like never happened for me. So like the reverse can happen too, where like you're conditioned to expect to feel conflicted and then feel no conflict.
Congratulations, by the way, for being one of the most unnaturally well-adjusted people I've ever met.
Thank you. It was amazing. It may be because, I wasn't caught or my parents pretended they didn't know or whatever. But, lest we make this too much about me, I will just say I, too, experienced the power of the kinds of feelings that teenage girls have when they are confronted with someone they really like, as Haywood says the heroine feels about blood plaisir. And yeah, all just to say that I think it's dismissive to say that these descriptions aren't realist. Like, to whom?
Yeah.
To the literary critics in the 1950s who were defining what 18th century novels were. Okay, but I think to some of us they are deeply relatable. So let me tell you what happens, right? Because we're right in the middle of it all. Thus much indeed she told him, that she was a virgin, and had assumed this manner of behavior only to engage him. But that he little regarded, or if he had, would have been far from obliging him to desist. Nay, and this is classic Haywood right here, nay, in the present burning eagerness of desire, 'tis probable that had he been acquainted both with who and what she really was, the knowledge of her birth would not have influenced him with respect sufficient to have curbed the wild exuberance of his luxurious wishes, or made him in that longing, that impatient moment, change his form of addresses. In fine, she was undone, and he gained a victory so highly rapturous that had he known over whom, scarce could he have triumphed more.
Whoa!
Yeah.
They did the dirty?
They did the dirty. Yeah, they did. Or he did.
Consensually?
Yeah, well, that's the big question. You could spend like a semester on this paragraph with a class because it's such a question. Is it consensual? What do you think?
Ooh. That's very hard to know, because a thing that we have talked about on the show before, actually, and that is also sort of floating around in the larger discourse, is like you couldn't write narratives where women threw their virtue away with enthusiasm, or the audience would be completely alienated.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you just couldn't do that. That was not only not allowed, but it was so unrealistic by the standards of society that they would have been like, who is this bitch? Like,
Yeah.
this is crazy.
Yeah.
You can't you cannot tell this story.
Yeah. It's not a story. Yeah.
So with the understanding that there is no universe in which she enthusiastically consents in the way that we would expect today,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like if Haywood's intent was that we were upset or too upset about this, then we would be talking about Tess of the D'Urbervilles,
Mm-hmm.
and she would die in a hayloft or something.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, totally. Like with her head on the side of the cow. Yeah. Oh, that novel destroys me. That novel. Like, is so unrelentingly brutal.
It's one of the saddest books ever written.
Yeah, it really is.
I don't know if we'll ever do it on the show, because it's just like, it's so grim.
I made the mistake of teaching Tess. Well, it wasn't a mistake, but I chose dubiously to teach Tess of the D'Urbervilles the first semester that students returned to campus after lockdown. Right? So I had a class of like 10, because many students chose not to come back to campus that semester. Like 10 students in a room sitting very far apart. They'd been alone in their rooms for a year. And I'm like, welcome back. Let's read Tess of the D'Urbervilles. Ready? It's going to be amazing. Oh my God. I think of that now. It's like, what was I doing? What was I doing? So anyway.
Oh
Yeah.
my God. Look, trauma hits us all different.
It does. It does. I was like, let's just lean in. Let's lean into the grief. But yeah, I mean, I think that Haywood in other novels writes more decidedly about women's distress in moments like this. And in those moments, they are typically saved from the rape, like right on the precipice of it happening. So she has a spectrum. And this is, I think, important. There could be sex scenes that warrant brutal rape, where like the woman dies afterward, right? Which is a trope of the 18th century. Or the like pornographic heroine who, as you said before, just like dispenses with all social codes and is like voraciously sexual, and is therefore unsympathetic. Those are like 2 points on a spectrum, and Haywood like writes across and in between those, which as a feminist literary historian, I deeply appreciate, because it gives much more richness to the idea that women could experience sex like there wasn't a multiple choice quiz of like how it was going to be. There were these various ways it could unfold. And I think this is a case where when I read this, the activity of her mind circling through these like hypothetical things, like if I say this, maybe he'll stop, but then everyone's going to know. And then it's like, it's like while her brain is doing all of that, something else is happening to her body. And the question of whether that's consensual, to me, it's not, but it's also a form of participation because her actions have already begun, while she's thinking. So to me, it shows that something like consent like doesn't even apply.
Yeah, like they just didn't have the concept of it that we have now.
Correct.
And that just is what it is.
And it's it's the 18th century. It's the era of like the slave trade, genocide, the extermination of indigenous people across the globe. So like, yeah, the idea that consent was like invented during the Enlightenment as a facet of the liberal individual is like confined so narrowly to like men who could make contracts, which was like, a very slim margin. So yeah, I don't even think it's not how we think of it today in like Sally Rooney's fiction, which I think is some contemporary fiction that like erotically stages affirmative consent. Like that was not even on the radar for Haywood.
Yeah, but it would feel very realistic to her readers and probably be fairly titillating to her readers. I mean, one of the things that we talked about a little bit in the Anne Rice episodes is the fantasy of what if this wasn't my choice, but in like a sexy way?
Yeah.
Like what?
Right. Yeah.
Like what if I could let go of all of the baggage I've been given around sex and sexuality by having someone tenderly make it all happen around me in a way that made me the most important thing in the universe.
It's amazing.
But also like quote unquote wasn't my decision, so I didn't have to feel culpable for what has just occurred.
Yeah, that's amazing. Right.
So,
Yeah, exactly. There's something alluring about that. And like also, this whole like sphere of intimacy is activated for this heroine that like she's never experienced before. So why would she be prepared to consent to it? She doesn't understand what her mind will be doing and her body will be doing in a moment like that.
I had not thought about the fact that she just did the world's shortest speed run from like having an unsupervised conversation to out and out penetrative sex.
Yeah.
In like 24 hours.
Correct. Yes. That's exactly right. Yeah. Again, this is like that's like the plot of an entire novel. And Haywood's like, we're just gonna get through this in a few pages. And that, but here's what's interesting. It's like, okay, but then what? Because like what narratives were available to women who did this or to whom this was done.
Right. What now?
So in that exact moment, he cannot understand why she's upset afterward because she claims, what have you done to me? What does she say exactly? She cries. He's totally confused. He gives her a pocket. He takes out of his pocket a purse of gold, gives it to her to pay her because according, to everything he's understood himself to be in a transactional situation with her. He gives her the money. She says, "Is this a reward," said she, "for condescension such as I have yielded to? Can all the wealth you are possessed of make a reparation for my loss of honor? Oh no, I am undone beyond the power of heaven itself," etc., etc. Which the amazed Beauplaisir heard without being able to reply, because he's literally like, what is she talking about?
Oh my-
like, blank, blank.
I took home a sex worker and now she's accusing me of having stolen her virtue. It's like,
and says she doesn't want the money. He's like, I'm not sure. Yeah, exactly. Like he has lost the script. He has no idea where he is. I actually find this part a little funny. Like I think Haywood's like being a little bit funny where they're speaking from two different realities and he doesn't know how to proceed. And she says the only reparation, and she uses the word reparation, the only reparation you can make me is to give me your love. And he's like, oh, okay.
It's like, what?
Yeah. He's like, sure, pretty lady.
It's like if you went to like a massage therapist and then at the end they were like, A of all, my turn, and B of all, we're dating now. And you're like, woo.
Yeah. Totally.
What?
Totally. She's like, by the way, here's my dad. He's like, yeah. So literally he's like, actually, I'm leaving for Bath, as it turns out. lo and behold. So he tells her pretty quickly he is about to, I don't know, go to Bath for the season or to visit relatives or something like that. So what does our heroine do? And she, by the way, has named herself at this point Fantomina as that disguise, as like the town mistress sex worker. So he's calling her Fantomina in that character.
Okay. Yeah.
Fantomina, she decides to tell her aunt that she's going to visit some relatives, and she buys the disguise of an inn worker, like a chambermaid. Like she buys laboring class clothes, like a bonnet and like a gray wool dress or something, and calls herself Celia, gets on the road to Bath, ready? Finds out where Beauplaisir is staying.
What?
And finds the proprietor of the inn and is just like, yo, you need a worker? How about I work for you?
Have we learned nothing from our Also, I like how we're migrating down the social ladder.
Totally.
Like, girl, chambermaid?
Yeah, right. She's like, it's gonna be so fun. I'll look so cute in like that little bonnet. It's gonna be amazing. So not only does she use her money to buy an outfit, she practices a broad country dialect, a rude, unpolished air, which she, having been bred in these parts, knew very well how to imitate. Theater historians really enjoy analyzing the story as well and studying Haywood because she invests her heroines with this capacity to like immediately. Oh, by the way, Eliza Haywood also was an actress. She was amazing.
Okay.
So she imagines women often to have this capacity to kind of like quickly pick up an accent or quickly pick up a dialect or like change characters really quickly, which, you know, she's doing throughout the story. Like even when she's still back in London as Fantomina, she's changing back and forth. Like during the day, Beauplaisir sees her at court and then she's like, I gotta get back to the room I'm sharing with him, and like has to change in the middle of the day. It's wild. So she's like running around doing this.
This is so slapstick.
It is. Yeah, it's incredible. It is very slapstick. And I can't believe someone needs to make a screenplay and like write a little like porny movie about this, I think.
HBO. It needs to be an HBO miniseries.
Limited series, totally.
Yeah.
It would literally chop up exactly as you'll see into that.
All right, so she's a chambermaid and she's affected like an over-the-top Cockney actress. She's like, hello, governor.
Yeah, exactly. And she goes to this inn and it's so funny. Like she calls herself Celia. She practices this dialect. She gets in her clothes and she surveys who's there to see if anyone will like sexually threaten her other than Beauplaisir, which I just find amazing. Like Haywood spends the time telling the reader, hey, the only other man who was staying in this inn at the time was a man with rheumatism who was too ill to literally, like she writes, like he was too ill to pose any danger to her. And then she writes that the heroine was in no apprehensions of any amorous violence, but where she wished to find it.
Oh,
so
spicy.
Yeah. Totally. So she's looking this idea of that now Celia / the heroine wants amorous violence.
Right. And so she's refining her approach. She was like, sex worker, too risky. We're downgrading. We're a chambermaid now.
Yeah.
We're where we can get in trouble.
Yes, exactly.
But only if we want to.
Well, that I don't know about. I mean, yes, if she wants to, but it's described as the kind of work that would be understood as sex work, most likely, right?
Okay. So it sounds like Haywood is actually making a point of being like, chambermaids aren't safe.
Oh, 100%. They're not. No, I mean, it's almost written about as though, like, I don't want to say any chambermaid would have been having sex with the men who stayed in the inn, because that's overstating it, but chambermaids and their proximity to the people who were staying in rooms whose doors could be closed, who needed like their laundry washed or maybe a sock mended, like they were in these kind of intimate quarters with single men who were traveling. So things could happen, right? Whether wanted or not. And in this case, Beauplaisir, indeed, when he finds her in his room, when he comes home from a day in Bath, immediately starts to flirt with her and is like, so do you have any little lovers? Do you get letters from boys? Like he starts just messing with her, and she acts shy and answers with such seeming innocence as more inflamed the amorous heart of him who talked to her. So her innocence, she's kind of playing something virginal, and he's like turned on again.
Oh, that's so creepy and effective
Yep.
and realistic.
Yep.
I don't like it.
I know. Yeah. He stands in for Haywood's point that men want what's new. She makes like a very gendered, strict claim about male sexuality and sexual desire. And she makes this throughout this story and in other fiction. Men get tired of women they know sexually,
Yeah.
and they're constantly needing like novelty to excite them again.
But she's manipulating him now.
Correct. So he thinks he's doing new things, and she's just like, little do you know, I'm the same broad you were having sex with back in London.
Joke's on you.
Joke's on you. So his wild desires burst out. He calls her little angel cherubim. He devours her lips, her breasts, with greedy kisses. Her half-reluctant body doesn't suffer to get loose, right? So, like, it's a that's, I think, the raciest passage in the novel. It's, like, very physical and visceral, right? Naming her body parts. But also here, Haywood, I think, is just leaning into the heroine's consent and, like, enthusiastic participation in this particular sexual union. So they do this for a month.
Whoa.
Yeah, he stays there for a month, and like that's it. Like we get that description, and then it's like his stay did not exceed a month in Bath, and then he's going back to London.
And at no point is he like, you look a lot like that's it's like,
no ma'am.
He was inside of her twice in 48 hours, and he did not piece together that she was the same.
Correct. Yeah, exactly. That is correct. And Haywood eventually will call that out. Like she will say, hey, reader, I know that you're thinking that this is totally impossible. And this is, again, some 18th century writers did this. They would be like, let me pause, reader, to tell you what was happening down here while this other thing was happening over there. So here she's speaking exactly to you. And she's saying that basically the heroine is so good at her disguises and her characters that she could dupe anyone. She writes, it may perhaps seem strange that Beauplaisir should in such near intimacies continue still deceived. I know, says Haywood, I know there are men who will swear it is an impossibility and that no disguise could hinder them from knowing a woman they had once enjoyed. In answer to these scruples, I can only say that besides the alteration with which the change of dress made in her, she was so admirably skilled in the art of feigning that she had the power of putting on almost what face she pleased, and knew so exactly how to form her behavior to the character she represented that all the comedians at both playhouses are infinitely short of her performances. Right? Yeah. She could like change the tune of her voice and change the nature of her glance. So Haywood is like, she's like one step ahead of you.
She's an Oscar-winning actress.
Yeah, exactly.
She's the Gary Oldman of ingenues.
Yeah. And it's interesting, like, does a story like this need any of this to be believable is like the big question, right? Yeah.
No, absolutely not. That's half the fun.
It is. And making Beauplaisir just seem like this kind of bumbling helium balloon of a man, is fun, right? She's clearly like just, his intelligence is compromised.
He's just Ken.
Yeah. He is. So... okay, so what do you think? What do you think? What do you think's going to happen when he gets on the road back to London?
Honestly, I have no idea. Well, I mean, she's going to follow it. She's going to put on a fake mustache and like rubber buck teeth and follow him.
Totally. I love it. Yeah, she's going to put on clown shoes and a red nose, and
she's going to dress up as a man next and be like, it's time for you to discover new things about your sexuality, Beauplaisir. She's going to pull a Mulan.
That's it's actually a really good idea.
Yeah.
But so close. She does not put on a fake mustache, but she does color in her eyebrows and blacken her hair so that she looks like she has a different complexion. Certainly not a different race, but she like darkens her hair and changes her clothes yet again to a black dress that would be associated with mourning, throws herself near the coach that Beauplaisir is using to ride back to London, and poses as a widow needing to get to London to talk to, I think it's an attorney, to basically like sort out her late husband's affairs so she can get his money.
I take it back. The only person she could feasibly be played by is Steve Martin.
That's great. Yeah, I know, totally. And the thing is, she doesn't act like a widow. She acts like a new widow. She's like, her eyes are moist. She's like, I need a ride. All the other coaches are full. Like, she acts like her grief is like present and immediate.
Because this is the other thing that turns men on, is like, oh, I'm so vulnerable and sad.
Yep. And I need someone, to like take charge. And she appeals to him when she's talking to him that she knows she'll be safe with him, right? She's like, I know you're a gentleman.
Oh
So
my
I
God.
know I can get in this coach, because coaches were notoriously like, remember, like, when is it Mr. Elton tries to like in Emma, I'm like jumping to Jane Austen again, but like it's in a coach that Mr. Elton tries to tell Emma, like, I have to marry you. And Emma's like, please stop. And he's like, no, but, and she's like, no, seriously, stop. Like, the coach was a place where that kind of thing could happen
Yeah.
over and over again in 18th century fiction.
A place of nebulous boundaries.
Yes, very close quarters and privacy. And, you know, you could kind of be in it without a guardian, so to speak. Yeah, and like suddenly people are saying things to you that you're not really ready to hear, or you're not wanting to hear, or you're certainly not consenting to.
It's funny. I had never really thought about that, but cars are still kind of like that.
Mm.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how many times have you had an unwelcome like conversation in a car that you weren't expecting to have?
Oh, I'm thinking about my driver ed teacher, which was like, yeah, this is gonna date me back to like 90 or 91. And he was so disgusting. And he would like have conversations with me and my best friend Sherry that he should not, like, using language and concepts he should not have been using.
Yes, like like as a teenager, adults all of a sudden getting weirdly intimate with you, and you're like, I didn't need this.
Totally.
What is it about vehicles?
I don't know. And are you of an age, did you babysit when you were a teenager?
I babysat and I was a nanny.
Woo! So were you ever in the car with like the people who employed you?
Oh yeah, no, that was always real. Yeah,
Right?
being driven home by
Yes.
it was always by the dad, because mom would be wine drunk. Didn't even this isn't even like one specific family. This was just the rule.
Yeah.
The parents would come home, mom would be wine drunk.
Yeah.
Dad would probably also be kind of drunk, but dad was more willing to drive drunk, and then dad would drive you home, and on the way home would tell you wild shit. Just like all of a sudden a middle-aged man would be like, my wife doesn't like me. And you're like, I don't need to know that.
Totally. Or like, I feel like and I did not know this then, like 13-year-old me with my crooked teeth and like extremely bad hair. I didn't realize, I think those men were trying to be cool.
Yes.
Us, right?
Uh-huh. They very much were.
Putting on the radio station and being like, oh, you like this song? You know, like not doing anything, but just like changing the terms of the conversation in a way that like you had no idea how to navigate.
Yeah, no, very much so. There was one dad that I nannied for who would try to offer me bong rips in his garage. And I'd be like, I'm watching your child right now, dude.
Oh my God.
I'd be like,
this isn't part of the job description as I understood it.
I was like, I'm not this cool. Like, I'm pretty cool, but I'm not that cool.
Right, totally. Look at me. I brought a book. I'm in 8th grade. Yeah. I'm also realizing, it's so interesting. And I spend time with lots of kids who grew up in New York. They're not kids, students, people who grew up in New York City who have no frame of reference for this, right? They're like they weren't driven home. They might not have even been babysat. They're on subway cars where like the terms of intimacy are completely different.
But it's also a weird nebulous in-between space where the rules suddenly change.
Yes.
If you're in a confined space being moved.
Yes.
Everything has changed.
Everything has changed.
So wait, are they about to have sex in this carriage?
So that's amazing that you asked that, because no, like that's where she like draws the line. She has some scruples, you know, really, of course. No, she absolutely, they make out basically. He is extremely turned on by her, and he gets her talking about feelings because he sees that she's grieving, and he manages to manipulate the conversation so that they move from talking about grief to talking about affection. And suddenly they're very close, and he can like see the teardrops on the end of her eyelashes, and they're kind of like breathing heavily at one another. This woman who was just on the side of the road crying about her dead husband. Yeah, it's amazing. And she manages to get him to take her to a room, and then they have sex there.
Damn! Someone moves quick. She's very efficient.
She really is. So yeah, they choose a room that happens to have a bed in it. Haywood writes when they make a stop on the road. Just, there just like happens to be a bed. So what are you going to do when there's a room with a bed? He lays himself down beside her. And the thing is, what's interesting, there's no sexual description there. It's just like they lay down, they are great. She like shows him gratitude, which means that they have sex. But unlike the chambermaid scene, there's no description anymore, because it's kind of like, well, you know what happens.
Been there, done that.
Been there, done that. And it doesn't warrant any kind of like hot language anymore on the part of Haywood, which is pretty interesting. So while sexual passion, you might say, I mean, it still is in the novel, it's not described as much as it goes on. Like the raciest parts are definitely in the beginning. But what gains momentum is like the way the heroine is managing all of these different identities, because she goes back to London as Widow Bloomer with Beauplaisir. He's turned on because she's new. But back in London, Fantomina is still there. So, right, so the heroine starts writing letters to him as Fantomina and as Widow Bloomer, like faking different handwriting for each letter. And he writes back to her. And then at that juncture, Haywood actually uses the epistolary form, which all the English majors out there will remember, right? She includes the letters that Beauplaisir writes back to these two different women, to show how different his language is between one and another and the other. So he writes back to Widow Bloomer in like passionate language because he's more turned on by her because she's newer. And then he writes back to Fantomina. He's basically like, you should know that you're really pretty. And when I have time, of course I'm going to see you again. Bye. But like, he writes to Widow Bloomer being like, it is, nothing can keep me away from you. Oh, my darling. Like, when will I see you again? So anyway, so after she reads these letters, and like, obviously in the letter to Fantomina, he says, I'm not going to be able to see you right away. This is what happens next. Traitor, cried the heroine, as soon as she had read these letters. 'Tis thus our silly, fond, believing sex are served when they put faith in man, right? So she's like, shaking her fist at the heavens, being like, I found him out. Like, but what's interesting again is that Haywood makes it this like general claim, like women make fools of themselves when they put their faith in men because they all do this.
I mean, she's not.
I don't want to confirm or deny it, but.
especially at the time, like
totally. It's like the modern day. It's like she's made two like Tinder profiles.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking about. It's like you just catfished your boyfriend into cheating on you, and now you're mad at him for cheating on you.
Oh my god, totally. Yeah, and again, the English professor in me is excited by how Haywood turns this scene outward to the readers. She writes. And this is supposedly the heroine talking to herself. How do some women make their life a hell, burning in fruitless expectations and dreaming out their days and hopes and fears, then wake at last to all the horror of despair? But I have outwitted even the most subtle of the deceiving kind, and while he thinks to fool me, is himself the only beguiled person.
Ha!
Yeah. So she's reveling in her, deception, but the text is turning these questions out to women, not in a way that I want to say is like, yeah, women should be told all men cheat, like not something essentialist like that. But she's kind of validating women's experiences of confusion or deception and like providing proof in the letters.
Yeah.
That these kinds of things can happen.
That's interesting because our intrepid heroine is like 3 steps ahead of this shit and she's clearly going to work it out.
Yeah.
But it's like you at home, you probably aren't a master of disguise
Yeah.
with like
Right.
an acting school caliber ability to switch accents.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
like maybe don't have any faith in dudes who say that they
Yeah.
love you.
Right.
Ooh, I don't know if my mic is picking this up, but there's apparently a big thunderstorm rolling through. So to the listeners, if you hear intermittent thunder in the background of my mic, that is why.
It's actually the soundtrack to the heroine discovering the treachery of her beloved. It's the gods agreeing and promising to avenge her.
Yes. As she gets rained on by the side of the road. Yes.
Totally. Yeah, it is. And I mean, I think that in a more, in like my serious take on Haywood is not that she's writing gratuitous fiction. I mean, of course it is gratuitous on some level, but there is this sense of really giving texture and almost like philosophical terms to how women understand sexual desire, sexual disappointment, the unfairness of monogamy, the double standard of gender. Like there's all these ways that her language is actually so precise about the feelings and the I almost want to say like the super ego, like the way that the narrator and the heroine use terms like virtue and reputation and honor and discretion. Those are those are
Yeah.
words that really refer to specific things and specific actions and ways of thinking, that this heroine is not dumb or so overcome with passion that she doesn't have access to those things anymore. So it almost gives the reader this like handbook in a way of how sexual adventure for women, and this is unfair, ends up entailing all of these like personal and social problems, which was
Yeah.
true.
Yeah, like there was no uncomplicated option.
That's exactly right. All of it was hypocrisy. All of it was a concession. Like there was no free choice about anything, whether it was marriage or sex or reproduction.
You had to have a hell of a costume budget.
You did. A lot of money, and like take some acting classes, really. And join the drama club, because you're gonna need it if you want to have this adventure. So she compares the letters, but then listen to this. She compares the sex that she's having, because he ends up meeting up with who he thinks is Fantomina and Widow Bloomer, like concurrently.
Wow.
So, totally. This is her experiencing sex as Widow Bloomer. When the expected hour arrived, she found that her lover, Beauplaisir, had lost no part of the fervency with which he had parted from her. But when the next day she received him as Fantomina, she preserved a prodigious difference, which led her again into reflections on the unaccountableness of men's fancies, who still prefer the last conquest only because it is the last. Here was an evident proof of it, for there could not be a difference in merit because they weren't the same person. But the Widow Bloomer was a more new acquaintance than Fantomina, and therefore was esteemed more valuable.
She just read that man to filth.
Totally. She's literally she's like having sex, taking notes, being like, this is fervent, this is passionate. And then like as Fantomina, she's like, not so fervent, not so passionate.
Very bored.
A little bored. But like I love how Haywood almost validates that as a form of research.
Yeah. And also like that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Because that feels so explicitly pointed toward women readers, not male readers, because they don't want to hear that about themselves.
Correct. And it's hard to like know the demographics of who was reading what in this period. And people are inclined to say that fiction like this was read by women because it's about women's experience. And that may be true. But I think if it's directed at women, it's in the way that you're describing, right? Which is kind of like, things. And here's how you know them. It's not just because it's about boys and sex. It's like, right. It's because she's exploring the avenues women have to learn about the world. And they have the theater, they have letters, they have sex. Honestly, they have clothes.
Yeah.
There's just like not that much that an aristocratic woman could like just freely explore. Really,
Well, and if men were her primary audience, she certainly doesn't seem worried about alienating them.
Not at all.
Like, this novel does not seem interested in whether or not men are interested in it. So
Totally. Yeah. 100%. And she alienated other men or just didn't give a shit. I mean, if there's anyone I could summon from the grave to have dinner with, trust me, it is Eliza Haywood.
yeah, she sounds great.
Amazing. Yeah, and she apparently married someone early in her life, but either he died or they did not live together. It's unclear. Very little is known about her like day-to-day life. But she wrote satires or kind of like satiric fictions inspired by some of the major male writers of the day, most notably Samuel Richardson, who wrote very long novels about virtuous heroines under sexual distress.
Okay.
And yeah, one of his novels was called Pamela, for example, and she wrote a novel called Anti-Pamela. Literally. About the heroine of that novel is named Cyrena Trixie, and she, you
It's a
know,
stage name if ever I've heard one.
totally, totally. So yeah, she and her sex worker mother schemed to try to marry her well, to marry her into a fortune. And that doesn't happen. Other sad things do. But she was not like afraid of Samuel Richardson and his repute and his printers and his allies. She was just like, I'm going to make some money if I use the name of that book in my book title, and wrote really inventive, interesting fiction that kind of riffed on some of what men were writing at the time. So
Hell yeah.
she was not concerned with, the opinion of men, which makes her all the more amazing and wonderful. So obviously he gets tired of Widow Bloomer.
Obviously.
Clearly, that lasts. I want to say it's maybe like 2 weeks or something like that. There's like a time frame assigned to each of these, and what she then does is, and Haywood calls her indefatigable at this point. She uses her money. She's fired all her servants by now because she doesn't want them to know what she's doing.
You'd have to, yeah.
Her aunt, she's back in town. She like literally finds 2 men on the street and is like, I need to involve you in a scheme. And I'm going to pay you really well. I just need you to promise that you are not going to tell anyone. It is not criminal. It will not hurt you. And it will not hurt anyone. It like involves me. And they're like, okay. Okay, lady.
Sure.
So they take the money and they basically help her rent a room, maybe even a whole flat. I'm not sure what it is, but they rent quarters and they set it up with, this is so funny, with blackout curtains so that it is perpetually pitch dark. She buys a mask.
What?
Starts going by the name Incognita.
Oh my God.
Writes a letter to Beauplaisir as Incognita. She calls him the all-conquering Beauplaisir and basically says, I know you. I know your reputation with women. Essentially, like, I know you're good. I want you to come spend some time with me. And the only thing I ask is that you don't ask to see my face.
So she's come full circle and turned him into a sex worker.
Ooh, I like this take. Say more.
Well, because like so she meets him at first because she is pretending to be a sex worker and he takes advantage of her. And she has now strung him along and manipulated him with her disguises for long enough that I'm assuming that she like the implication is that she has become very good at manipulating him. And now she is the one pulling from a position of power and reducing him to his sex organs.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? She's just like, I've heard you give out the good dick, and I would like the good dick.
I would like that.
And I'm going to do it like on my terms in my context.
Yes.
And I'm going to use you for sex.
Yeah, I think so. All I'd add to that, because I think this is one of the things Haywood does really well. Yes, it is good dick, but it is also good sex. Like, as she describes it, right? It's like, there's like, like in the Widow Bloomer thing, there's like talking and talking and talking. Yeah. And then it's like, ooh, not here. Let's go to the room. Like there are like, it's like plotted sex. Like it's not just like a quick, a quick screw in an alley. It is a kind of performance that like some might say is part of the fun of sex, right? It is not just the one action. And I think Haywood does this kind of remarkable job of showing. And again, I don't know if, maybe this is men's experience too, but she's documenting like women's experience here, that there's an element of like talking role playing,
tension,
exactly, build up. There are other actions than just the penetrative sex that are like the good, the good stuff. It's like all bundled.
yeah,
Yeah, so like he's good that way, right? As she has discovered,
when he wants to be.
or he wants to be. I mean, she seems, I tend to believe he is, because she is so hell-bent on remaining intimate with him,
No, sorry, I said when he wants to be. What we've learned is that he
Got
can
it.
turn it on,
Got it. Yes.
but then he can lose his attention span.
I agree. When he wants to be, he can be good. And when he wants to be absent, he can just like bounce and, remove himself or just be tepid. Yeah, to your point.
But so she is, the tables have turned. She is summoning him for sex.
Yes. And all the while still exchanging letters with Widow Bloomer. But yeah, when he shows up to have sex with her as incognita, this is the strangest part of the novel to me. Haywood carries this off as though it's possible, right? She leaves the mask on the entire time. All of the curtains are closed, including in the morning when he wakes up and beseeches her to take off the mask, and she won't. And she actually like runs out of the room because he's trying to take it off of her, and she refuses to become kind of revealed or unconcealed in that way. But it's so like, but the visuals of this, it reminds me, are you a Twin Peaks fan?
It's actually a weird gap in my pop culture knowledge. I'm aware of it.
Well, when you watch it in the first season, and those of you out there are going to know exactly what I'm talking about, there's a scene where a father goes to a brothel and nearly has sex with his daughter. Because the daughter is like, she's not working there, but she's like making mischief there. I can't remember the details. Anyway, she has a mask on, and there's this totally insane scene that, like, thinking back that was a primetime show on network television is batshit crazy. But like, there's a scene where like the father is like toying with his own daughter who's in a mask. It gives me those vibes where like there's something so it's not maybe gothic. I don't know. There's something so Stanley Kubrick, weird, surreal about it. But it places emphasis in the description on her body. Beauplaisir is wild with impatience for the sight of a face which belonged to so exquisite a body. Yet he would not immediately press for it, believing before he left her, he should easily obtain that satisfaction. So in the beginning, before they have sex, he imagines, like he sees her body and is like, what face could be attached to that? And then assumes after they've had sex that she'll reveal it. Like he assumes it's a ruse, and then is really frustrated when it isn't. He's actually kind of pissed off, but of course turned on.
Again, like how the turntables, like she's the one drawing boundaries, and like he's stuck dealing with them. And also I'm sorry, I know that this is like such kind of low-hanging fruit in terms of poking fun at the novel, but like you would think that by now that she would have like, I don't know, like a mole.
Yeah, totally.
Like on
a little birthmark.
Yeah, like somewhere.
Yeah.
That after he'd seen her nude this frequently for this long, that some of the landmarks would start to look familiar.
Totally. Or a particular, place of pleasure, one might say.
Yes.
A little spot, or a position or a habit. Yeah, of course. I mean, of course.
I would like to think that I would recognize the important landmarks of most of the people I've had sex with, even stripped of context.
Yes, exactly. Even in like just a kind of vacuum.
Yeah.
Well, and like again, the not to get too nerdy or unfun about that, because of course that's totally right. And like Haywood's like, but if we put them in a dark room, maybe it'll work.
That's fair. Good point. Good point, Haywood.
But also, like 18th century fiction, like Robinson Crusoe was a novel about a guy on an island for like 49 years, you know, with a thriving plantation in Brazil. Like it's like there are just like insane things about these fictions that were really being written to experiment less with what's plausible and more with like, what can these kinds of parameters do for a story? Like, put this young girl in the proximity of sex workers in a theater and give her money and a hot guy. Let's see what happens.
Also, like, maybe I'm selling her short. Maybe she's like covering up birthmarks. She's drawing on new ones. She's trimming her bush. She's putting on a merkin. She's
totally all that stuff. Exactly.
She's shaving her legs. She's growing her hair out. Like, I don't know.
Wearing flats, wearing heels. Yeah, right. Wigs.
Tattoos.
Totally. All those things. Yeah, so can we imagine what brings her fun to an end? Want to make any guesses?
Well, it's funny because you and I have just had a conversation literally right this very moment about like, well, you know, you need to let go of a certain amount of realism for the novel to work. But also it strikes me that they've been having a lot of sex.
Mm-hmm.
Unprotected sex.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very curious to see like are they gonna get married? What is happening?
Right. Well, no. Two bad things happen. One,
Oh.
her mother comes to town.
No.
Yeah, mom comes. And mom's like, so what have you been up to?
Oh my God.
Yeah. And her mother is immediately like, you are going, as an aristocratic mother would do, you're going to spend every minute with me all the time. We're going to hang out. We're going to have tea. We're going to do needlepoint. We're going to do more needlepoint. We're going to receive visitors. We're going to go to the opera. We're going to have dinner and tea and needlepoint. And like, that's what her mom's all about.
I kind of forgot we had parents.
Yes. Yeah, you forgot she's like 16.
Yes.
So this like so suddenly the lady is like severely curtailed of her fun. Like she just can't pop out and do all these things anymore. So the incognita plot only lasts for about 2 weeks. Mom comes to town, then she gets pregnant, as you just predicted. Yeah.
There it is.
So while her mom's in town, the ending is nuts. So she uses her corset. She eats very little. She uses her corset to tie her waist very tight. Wears big skirts. Obviously, this is the era of a hoop petticoat, so that could like cover up a pregnancy decently. But at the middle of a ball, which her mother brings her to as like her farewell to London, because her mother's like, we're going to go to the country for a while. You've been having too much fun here. At her goodbye ball, she goes into labor.
What?
Yeah, like in the middle of it. She goes into labor.
She has a prom night bathroom baby?
Yes.
What?
It was there that she was seized with those pangs, which none in her condition are exempt from. And nobody knows. She's hidden it from her mother. So
for 9 months?
For 9 months. Well, she's probably like, let's see, 1, 2, 3. She's probably like 4 months along, maybe, or 3 months when her mom arrives. The math, you know.
But
I don't
just
think
like
Haywood's calculating by the math. But anyway, yeah, she goes into labor at the ball. Here's what's crazy. So she's in labor. Like they remove her obviously to her lodgings, wherever they're staying, the aunt's house, wherever it is. And she is in labor. While she's in labor, literally, this is Haywood. It was a great while before the heroine could be brought to confess anything. Because her mother's like, who did it? Who did it? Who did it? Who did it? Like while she's in labor.
Yeah.
And much longer before she could be prevailed on to name the man whom she so fatally loved. But the rack of nature, the pains, right? The rack of nature growing more fierce, and the enraged old lady, her mother, protesting no help should be afforded her while she persisted in her obstinacy. I'm just going to stop there. Her mom's like, I'm not going to help you give birth until you tell me who did this to you.
Oh my God.
Her mom is so awful. She, the heroine, with great difficulty and hesitation in her speech, at last pronounced the name of Beauplaisir. She had no sooner satisfied her weeping mother than the sorrowful lady sent messengers for a midwife and for the gentleman. So her mother's like, I'm not calling him a midwife until you tell me who the father is. It's like a weird Jerry Springer show.
That is some like after school special via like HBO. Like
crazy.
No medical attention for you until we figure out who knocked you up.
Totally. I mean, while she's in labor, it's wild. So as the midwife comes, as Beauplaisir makes his way there, she gives birth to a girl. It like has just happened. Beauplaisir walks in. He is totally confused about why he's being summoned here.
Yeah, I bet.
Right? The mother says, she presents Beauplaisir to the new mother, the heroine. Is this the gentleman to whom you owe your ruin? Or have you deceived me by a fictitious tale? Oh no, resumed the trembling heroine. He is indeed the innocent cause of my undoing. The innocent cause of her undoing, right? So she then reveals the plot. And like literally, the narrator says, "'Tis difficult to determine if Beauplaisir or the mother were most surprised at what they heard. He, that she had been so blinded by her artifices, or she, the mother, that so young a creature should have the skill to make use of them. Both sat for a time in a profound reverie, right? Till at length she broke it first with these words, "Pardon, sir." So the mother's like, "Sorry to trouble you. There's nothing we can ask of you here. Go on your way."
No.
Yeah,
That's not how that works.
I know.
He still had sex with her.
And yeah, right. But not knowing who it was, he is like literally has no responsibility for the consequences. So he offers, and this is supposed to make him look like a good guy. He offers to like maintain the child. He offers to take the child and with his fortune, like raise it and care for it. Not himself, obviously, but with like a governess and a nurse and all that.
Yeah.
And they will not say yes to that. So he leaves, and the mother sends her daughter to a monastery in France. The end.
What? Wait. What?
Curtains. That's it.
I don't understand.
I know. It's a lot. It's a lot in the last page.
So all of that was for nothing?
Well, it depends how you read it, sort of. Though she had a great sexual adventure that most women would not, have the resources to sustain. The monastery, people read differently. Like, on the one hand, monastery meaning like convent, basically.
Yeah, okay. I was about to be like, not a monastery, not with the monks, not with the men.
No, like an abbey of some kind. And some literary critics emphasize that these monasteries could be places of learning and reflection, like a female, kind of institution of learning, as it were.
Okay.
Where visitors could be received. So it was kind of a place for sending highborn, disgraced daughters. Like, that is one connotation of what that could mean. The fact that it's in France implies it would be vaguely Catholic, which is slightly weird for, Protestant England. But the other reading is more punitive, right? That she's actually being sent to be like a novitiate in a convent and will be assigned to a cloistered life of prayer and remorse.
Right. So you enjoyed sex for a little bit less than a year, and now you'll never enjoy it ever again.
Correct. Exactly.
You're welcome.
You're welcome. Though, one other little variation that some people like to point out is that convents in the literary imagination had this connotation of lesbian eroticism.
Sure.
So, I think all of that is I think that's a little bit of a stretch of what Haywood is getting at. I think Haywood is like, this has to end. I think Haywood knows, which is true. There are 3 available endings here. Death.
Right.
Madness.
Sure.
The convent.
Right. Okay. So yeah, I mean, so this is
in this time.
This is as good as it gets. I suppose I got so carried away on the adventure that I really thought somehow we were getting married at the end of this, but I guess that's just not. Yeah. It's not happening because we gave our virtue away.
Yeah, that's the social premise on which he is not culpable. So yes.
Yeah.
But interestingly for Haywood, there's another bit that she writes as part of a larger periodical she wrote called The Female Spectator. There's a tale in that about a young woman who is virtuously betrothed to a young man. I think they're highborn. They're at least middle class. And she's raped. Like brutally raped.
Oh God.
And it's horrible, and becomes pregnant, and the person she's engaged to says, actually I don't know if she becomes pregnant, but she's raped and it's known that she is. He says, "I'm going to marry her anyway," which is amazing. But what does the family say? Her own family says, "We can't let you do that because that is too much of a social
oh my God
step down for you." Yeah. So Haywood imagines that there are men who would marry in this scenario.
Right.
And there are certainly fictions and historical evidence that people did marry women that they had sex with before marriage, but they can't be publicly compelled to.
This is so interesting because for Fantomina, the artist known as Fantomina, their first encounter is, as we discussed, nebulously consensual. And then her virginity is gone. And so is part of this just reading between the lines? We all know that you can only be so subversive, right? In the 17th. There's only so much you can get away with as an author.
Mm-hmm.
is it a little bit just like, well, you're ruined now, let's have some fun with it?
Yes.
Like,
Yeah. I mean, I think the loss of virginity frees Haywood up for this interval to like let this heroine loose and like see what the sex can look like, what the seductions and the kind of the premise of sex can look like in a environment or a sort of culture where the male partner is going to tire of the same action or the same person, right?
yeah.
So it like gives it creates this like narrative place for Haywood to experiment with like sexual chaos unleashed by the loss of virginity, but then like reined in. It's not, reined in by the fact that Beauplaisir is going to get tired of every single one of these women. So it becomes this place of invention for her. Because like what I like to think of is like first of all, what if he had been like, hey, let's get married. The sex has been amazing. Like this would be
Right.
great. Like imagine like this erotically charged marriage. Like that's such a wonderful thing to think about. But the other, I mean, if given the parameters of 18th century options for women, like a sexy marriage would be a great thing. But the other possibility is that this could have been a narrative about the sexual adventure of a couple, who were somehow deceiving or having their sexual liaisons under the radar of a kind of oppressive and vigilant social body. You know what I'm saying? Like there
Yeah.
were other things she could have done.
When you and I do the rewrite for the HBO miniseries,
Yes.
we'll throw in a post-credit scene where he turns up at the nunnery
Love
and
it.
like and gets her. He
I
like
love it.
changes his mind.
Totally.
He's like, I can't stop thinking about the incredible sex we were having, and also you're very smart and pretty.
Yeah, exactly. And funny and like wildly creative.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
And also you're the actress of a generation. Like, yes, hello, I've come to take you away from the nunnery and I'm going to give you the capital to open our own theater.
Yes, and put you in charge of it. I know.
Yes.
Oh my God, there are so many ways this could pan out well. But it really does, I think it surely is, I'm one of those people, and I'm not alone, that reads narratives not for the ends, but for the middles.
You kind of have to in classic literature because they all have the same ends because they had to.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like watching movies made during the Hays Code. You just have to snip off the last 15 minutes of every single one, and that's what the filmmaker wanted to make.
Yeah. I mean, and I think some of this can still be true. Like, so in general, and I should write something about this someday, the pregnancy plot really irritates me. Like, I feel like in almost everything you're watching, with the exception of Succession, that series, which I think did it brilliantly, but I'll put that aside because that's not what we're talking about. Often when you encounter a powerful heroine who's kind of living a life that does not have a predetermined future, and I can't think of an example right now, but it's just like, oh, she's pregnant. Oh, look at that. I mean, it happened on the like Friends, that sitcom, like that was a thing. I can't think of better examples right now, but I feel like it's so incredible. Like you see a woman throw up and you're like, oh, right, of course she's pregnant. Like obviously that like has to be what's happening. And I find it so disappointing. But the other thing is that the marriage plot, I think, is still such a dominant and boring way of ending stories about films, notably about sexual adventure, or novels like All Fours by Miranda July, which everyone thinks is this like subversive, I think, kind of edgy novel. It ends up being like a weird conduct book at the end about how to like act like you're a queer lady and be married to a rich man. I don't know.
What?
A little bit my hot take. Like that's a little unfair. It's a little unfair.
I missed that one, but that's fascinating.
Yeah, and I do want to say that's unfair of me, but like it's not totally off base. But did you see Baby Girl? Did you see that film?
No, but I've read a little bit about it.
Yeah,
and yeah,
I just think that I don't want to give away spoilers, but the ending of that I think is tamer than it needed to be.
What really jumps out at me that is interesting, thinking about the pregnancy plot as being this like kind of age-old trope that is still with us, which is like, I've got this freewheeling woman character and consequences need to happen. So boom, pregnancy.
Yeah.
Is what jumped out at me as soon as we finished this story was that it actually reminded me of a young man's coming of age narrative. So like it reminded me of that. What is that movie where he's a roadie? Almost Famous.
Almost Famous. Yeah.
So like using Almost Famous as a template, because this is like a very, very common story, right? Like I've read 8 million novels with this exact framework and seen 8 million movies with this exact framework. And it's like, I'm a young man and I'm exempting myself from the privileges with which I was raised to kind of live on the other side of the tracks for a while, and it's going to get wild, and I'm going to learn some things about life, and I'm going to be surrounded by all of these edgy characters. And then you feel the narrative be like, oh, right, consequences have to happen so that we can now jump ahead and be like, oh, you need to go back to normalcy. You got to come back to the right side of the tracks.
Mm-hmm.
And for men, someone always dies.
Interesting.
Right?
Yeah, right.
That's what always happens is when it's a
Yeah.
young man's narrative, someone dies. Often a woman. Not always a woman, but often a woman.
Mm-hmm.
But somebody in their vicinity dies and they're like, wow, death is real. Guess I
better straighten up.
Yeah, I better go get a day job.
Yeah, right. Right.
And for women, it's pregnancy.
Yeah.
And that's so funny because I would love to see them reversed.
Totally. Totally. Like, oh my God, dude, you're getting a little thick around the middle. Oh, guess what? You're pregnant.
But it's fascinating that we don't think, it's like women can't be edgy enough to have their friends die, I guess.
Right.
Or maybe deep enough. Women can't be deep enough to be affected by like the brevity of life.
Yeah. Yeah.
They have to make a baby.
Right.
And men can't be roped into responsibility by fatherhood. It has to be their own mortality.
Yes. Right. It's about them, right? Whereas the woman is forced to care for another, or like her body compels her to a future that she may or may not want. And like, after Dobbs, this is like all the more poignant, right? That like, yeah, I know, vomit, that these kinds of closed doors or these kinds of overdetermined endings are, can be real in so many cases. Yeah. And the other thing I was going to say about women's, in the 18th century, women often wrote about death, actually. Like, many did not write about, well, the ones I've read in their actual letters and diaries, many, like, women write, with the ones I know, with disdain about being pregnant. Like, they don't like it. They feel sick. They don't like it. They're afraid they're going to die. I mean,
it's very dangerous.
Yeah, totally. Totally. But what they write about in exquisite detail is their grief on women either marrying and moving away, and they won't probably ever see them again, or we'll see them rarely, or women dying. Like, it's deeply, deeply moving. So real women were having these experiences, but somehow the representation in literature becomes like, oh no, this is the end. Like, your body comes and gets you.
God,
anyway,
that's bleak.
It is.
And I mean, I guess that is interesting too, to be reminded that, like, again, for men, it's what I'm going to call like the mortality plot, like, remember thou art mortal. But I guess especially until very recently, and still sometimes now, being pregnant is the mortality plot.
Yes, totally. Yes. And in this period, for sure, that was a very not unlikely outcome.
Well, goddamn, justice for Fantomina.
Yeah, totally. And to end on a slightly more positive note, like, I do think Haywood wants us to focus more on the adventure part of the narrative. Like, the end is so almost like a little bit pat, a little bit conventional in the way that it has to rein itself in, that I think it does point more attention toward the heaving bosom in the coach on the way to London when she's dressed as a widow, and stuff like that. I think Haywood did want us to enjoy the adventures before we know where they lead the heroine. I think that's really her point.
Yeah. Well, and that's the part everyone remembers anyway.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, to go back to using Almost Famous as an example, or like Stand By Me, or like any like coming of age narrative, everyone remembers the middle part. No one remembers the end.
Yeah.
The end's the least important part.
Yes, totally. Love it. So we'll sit there in the middle in her outfits and her fake handwriting and her strong dialect and all of it, and just watch Beauplaisir bop around from girl to girl thinking she's different.
In
That's
her
where
like
I want to be.
slapstick sex romp.
Totally. So to anyone who thinks the 18th century is a conservative literary period, or anyone who thinks that our sexual conventions are more, I don't know, liberated today than they were. I offer Eliza Haywood as a wonderful counterpoint.
Those motherfuckers were raunchy.
Totally raunchy.
And if to anyone who's new to the show, if this tickled you, if you haven't yet, go back and listen to our episodes on The Roaring Girl, which is also extremely raunchy and cross-dressy and gendery. Because, man, the 16 and 1700s, they were filthy.
They were. I mean, the philosopher Michel Foucault famously writes of the 17th and early 18th century as kind of like the twilight of sexuality being untethered to identity, so that people could pursue actions without the consequence of having those actions determine who you were, and pathologizing certain kinds of sexuality that rises in the 19th century. Yeah, and I think he's right.
Yeah, I think we kind of forget, because it looms so large in our collective consciousness. I think we kind of forget that, like, the Victorian era was a backlash to things.
Mm-hmm. It was.
It wasn't just sort of the foundation upon which the modern world was built. It was reacting to things that came before it, and it was reacting to a perceived sort of licentiousness that they thought had gotten out of control.
That's right. It was a reaction and a reorganization, right? Like classifying things into ways they should be done and names that you gave to things, whether it was in sexology or whether it was in a museum or a library, right? The Victorians were obsessed with, like, let's put this thing in its place and talk about it a lot.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Thus the birth of eugenics, among other things.
And the delight of being in a pre-Victorian time with Haywood.
Yes. Thank you. What an adventure.
Totally fun. Thanks for wanting to talk about it.
Yeah, this was great. Now, again, if people cannot get enough of you, where should they look for more?
They can look for more on KathleenLubey.com. There's a public writing tab somewhere, or an interviews tab, where I have some other podcasts I've done, very much on this topic, a little bit more about porn explicitly. And for anyone with, you can find my academic writing there and a couple of my crossover pieces as well. Or, I don't know, come by St. John's University and take one of my classes. Come major in English. Everyone, go major in English.
Yes, I second the motion. Do it. Totally. It's worth it. It's good.
Do it. Thank you, Grace.
Thank you. And just a reminder that you can also buy Kathy's book, What Pornography Knows. Wait, what pornography? Yes.
What Pornography Knows.
There we go. I second guessed myself for a minute and was like, what pornography knew? No, it's what it knows. It knows things, and it knows them now in the present tense.
Correct.
And thank all of you for being here with us this week as we went on a romp through some old-timey smut. We will be back in 2 weeks. Just a reminder, that is the new schedule. I'm sticking with it every other week. So we will not be back next week. We'll be back the week after that with more very cutting-edge, timely content, because that's what we do here. And as always, if you can, this week, this month, this pay period, consider supporting a living author or academic, because especially right now, they could really, really use the love. Bye. Didn't Read It was created, written, researched, and recorded by me, Grace Todd. Maddie Wood is our co-producer and social media maven. Our theme song is Books 2.0, written, performed, and recorded by William Albritton. Our logo was designed and illustrated by the incredibly talented Jess Versus. Reach out to us with questions, concerns, or academic scrutiny at didntreaditpod@gmail.com.